What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some details of Outer Worlds 2, specifically following the deep dive that Obsidian did on the game following the Xbox Game Showcase yesterday from the time of this video, ideally. And with that deep dive, unsurprisingly, we got a whole lot of very specific details that finally gave me the information I needed to cover the game a little more thoroughly, because after playing through and mostly enjoying the original game, albeit with some caveats that we're actually going to cover a bit in this video, for instance the flaws system being ironically kind of flawed, as one simple example. Otherwise though, we're just going to jump straight into this thing as there is quite a bit to go over. But simply put, it looks like The Outer Worlds 2 seems to be a game where Obsidian is trying to do everything bigger and better. Specifically because, in their own words, they have more time and more money than they've ever had in order to do this. Despite being known for their great sequels, time and money were often factors working against them, where for once that's not the case, and given the overall very positive reception of the original game, which did quite well for them, they're clearly banking on this one quite a bit, and thus, obviously, that is why they're putting so much of an investment into it. Now, on the consumer side, I would say that obviously is good in terms of what the game is likely to be, but it does come with one big problem, and I would say this is probably going to be an issue for most people, which is that the base price they are charging for this is $80, which already game companies are trying to push and normalize. But as always, increased prices come with increased expectations, and while there are, frankly, games I would happily pay $80 for, it becomes a harder sell the higher that price gets, and especially with a game that we simply don't know whether it'll be worth that much yet. It's definitely of note at the very least, and while yes, they are almost certainly trying to push people into Game Pass subscriptions since this will be available there, I am frankly not a fan of that as a practice. But with that out of the way, let's actually dive into the details of this and see what they are ultimately going to be charging $80 for. So straight away, The Outer Worlds 2 takes place in a different colony than the original game. This time we are in Arcadia, which has its own set of problems and factions and people to get to know, of course. And they made it pretty clear that was kind of their goal going forward, to be, every game in a different colony to tell a different story and everything, and that way each colony could be its own thing without having to sort of undo anybody's chosen ending for a given place. But as I mentioned, this is Arcadia, and Arcadia is primarily ruled by a faction known as the Protectorate. The Protectorate are the descendants, more or less, of the person who made the skip drives, or the faster-than-light travel devices used in this universe. Except a bit of an issue has popped up in that something with these drives is causing all sorts of rifts in time and space to pop up, which is recently causing all sorts of problems in this area, and we are sent to the place to investigate as an Earth Directorate agent. More on that in a moment. Other factions include a splinter of the church we encountered in the first game, alongside a hostile corporation, as is the tone for the Outer Worlds, in the form of Anti's Choice, who seems to have subsumed Spacer's Choice and become Anti's Choice. And that conflict, as well as that central investigation around the rifts, is going to play a crucial role in the fate of this colony as you choose to investigate it. Again, though, we play as an Earth Directorate agent. You could think of this as a sort of U.S. Marshal, Federal Police, that kind of thing. Your goal is basically to come here at the behest of Earth and investigate what is going on. Now, while that is a bit of a set role, they want to make it clear that the motivation of why you are doing that and how you feel about it and where you go from there is entirely up to you, which is why you get to customize things like your background, as an example, to let you pick and choose exactly what brought you to that lifestyle, alongside your traits. Now, traits are especially interesting because you can pick positive traits, but you also then have to pick a negative trait to go with it. So rather than pick a single thing that brings both a positive and a negative, you can pick your positive traits, but then have to also pick the negative traits as you so choose, and unsurprisingly then, these are big gameplay modifiers. Beyond that, you'll also tag skills, of course, that your individual character is good at, and they wanted to make sure here that your points in skills were more impactful. In the original game, you got a lot of skill points, but they weren't necessarily hugely impactful on their own. So the numbers here will be lower, but per point, they will do more for each individual skill, with the skills you do have representing the sort of play styles you would would probably imagine when you think of any kind of RPG like this. But it's worth mentioning though that skills aren't the only thing that define gameplay, they just define the sort of general action, whereas with things like traits and perks you can get much more specific. Perks in particular, they mentioned looking to New Vegas actually for a lot of inspiration on this particular front. In fact, this game will apparently have even more perks than New Vegas has, and they're used pretty much everywhere, from environmental exploration to adding just unique things in combat. A few things that they gave an example of here were things like the serial killer perk, which would allow you to kill particular people and then collect their heart as a sort of trophy, and this would give you a permanent bonus to your health as an example. Another one they showed off was Assassin, which would give you movement bonuses every time you killed something, which in combination with the tactical time dilation or the time slow could be a really deadly combo. And it is in combining sort of all of those things together initially that is going to lean into your primary build. But what gets crazy there actually is the additions to things like weapons and equipment, because even here is somewhere they're trying to really push things home as bigger and better. So for instance, in the first game we had science weapons, which did all sorts of crazy stuff and were generally fun to use. I made a whole build around using just the science weapons, as a matter of fact, in one of my not exactly original, but pretty old videos that I enjoyed making. But here we not only have more science weapons, but they've actually expanded this to science armor, giving us an example of a sort of sentient suit we could put on as one example. So it looks like even there's going to be some fun stuff. And that's to say nothing of the fact that this particular game will have throwables, which the first game did not, which means you can chuck things at enemies. And then there's of course just the unique weapons and things like that will be added as a sort of a given. And they're just doing everything they can to pump up that original gameplay style while still keeping the core of the original. But what makes that really interesting is the flaw system, because as I mentioned earlier, I found the flaw system to be itself a little bit flawed. The way this worked in the original game was basically that if you were doing a specific thing pretty often, the game would ask you like, hey, do you want to take a negative to this thing in order to give you a positive? That is to say, a perk point specifically. So for instance, if you were fighting a lot of a particular type of enemy, you could choose to become afraid of them as a phobia in exchange for a perk point, which would give you negative stats when you fought them. The problem with this system was that some of these flaws weren't really a negative ever. As an example, a really easy one is that when you were trespassing and sneaking through places you weren't supposed to be, you could take the paranoid flaw, which would give you reduced stats while you were doing that. But if your stealth was so maxed out to the point where you were doing that, those reduced stats didn't matter because you were never in danger to begin with. So flaws like that were just free perk points, which is why that system didn't work, even though it was a really cool idea. Well, here in the Outer Worlds 2, what they've chosen to do instead is rather than give you a direct perk point, it instead gives you a direct gameplay benefit while also accompanying it with a specific negative. They gave a couple of examples here, for instance, Bad Knees and Kleptomaniac. Bad Knees would allow you to move significantly faster throughout the game, especially when you're doing things like sneaking. But the catch here is that when you stand up from sneaking, it immediately alerts all of the enemies around you, or just anyone else in general, say if you're trying to sneak through a shop or something. So there could be moments where that is a problem. Another example they gave was the Kleptomaniac one, and this would allow you to sell anything you steal for some more money than you would normally get for it. But the problem here is that sometimes anything you mouse over you will automatically steal, which can be a problem if you're in a shop looking over stuff and then just automatically steal it, which is going to lead to, of course, run-ins with the law and stuff. So as you can hopefully see from their examples, it sounds like the goal there is to change gameplay as opposed to just giving you free perk points in some cases, which sounds a lot better, but to be fair, I'd have to see this in full motion before I really made much of a deliberation about it. Another big thing they went over were, of course, the companions. They listed all of them out, but before we do that part, they also wanted to emphasize that companions here have character arcs now. They have several different ways they can wind up, and you'll be able to influence their ultimate end goal. However, it still looks like they're sticking to mostly no romance, as has been the case with many of their games up to this point. But each of these companions besides that will, in addition to being a full character arc, also of course represent one of the factions, which is also very typical Obsidian. That's what they do. But our companions will be Niles, Marisol, Abba, Annette, and Tristan. So the ones that stood out to me immediately were Abba, a cultist who is a member of a cult that was worshipping those time rifts, Niles, who seems to be struggling with some law and order, Annette, who is a combat medic who was grafted with some animal parts for intimidation purposes, but it didn't quite work, and you're going to try to help out with that, of course. Tristan, a member of the Protectorate, a sort of Judge Dredd, at least wannabe Judge Dredd, I suppose might be the way to describe it. But they also mention that how you treat these companions is going to really matter as well in terms of the overall narrative outside of just their character arcs. Though I am curious if a solo run would be possible, though I would imagine so given how they've structured everything else. But to be fair, Avowed was a companions required situation, so I guess we'll ultimately see. But we're not done yet because we have a few notes on exploration. For starters, third-person camera, confirmed. No surprise here really after Avowed had it, but if you want to play this game in third person, totally doable. That is, in fact, something they have planned here, and, so far, again, it's looking more or less like what they had in Avowed, maybe a little sharper, given, I imagine, more time to work on it, but no more worrying about only seeing your character and all this cool stuff you've acquired only in menus. But the other thing they really wanted to push here was reactivity, both in terms of how, things like companions react to you, but also how the world reacts to you as well. And some of the things they gave an example of here was that they're going to have radio stations this time around. One radio station for, each of the major factions and their territory, and what's more, each of these radio stations will have like roughly 20 songs each, and they will also react to the things you are doing as appropriate for their faction. So if you did something favorable for, say, the Protectorate, they'll sing your praises, but you can also hear about that same event via the radio station for the other factions who look on it less favorably, let's say. Which sounds like a particularly interesting setup overall. So, kind of drawing this video to a close, I would say a lot of this sounds good. It looks like they have, in fact, taken a lot of the feedback and pain points of the original, and they're actively working on making them better, which does fill me with hope that this game will actually be fun. Realistically, from this deep dive and the announcements of the release date on October 29th, my main hang-up is really just the price of it, and I know they're just trying to push people into Game Pass, but man, that is a tough pill to swallow. Ultimately, when this game releases, we'll see if it's worth that or not, but it's just setting an unnecessary expectation, especially when we've seen games like Baldur's Gate 3 and the like recently do well for less. And when you're charging these higher prices, you're just inviting comparisons like that. And as somebody who used to work sales, my immediate thought is show me the P&L. Like, explain the math to me and why you need to do this, because I would bet money you don't. But either way, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about all of this down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.